It started, as these things always do, with a stupid dare. Ryan was the one who suggested it. They were sitting at a booth in a dingy little diner on the edge of town, nursing milkshakes and fries, when he leaned in with that grin, the one that meant trouble. "Come on," he said, eyes flicking between them. "Let's go check it out." Mark groaned. "Dude, no one actually goes in there." "Exactly," Ryan said, as if that proved his point. "It's been abandoned for years. We sneak in, take a few pictures, and leave. 5 minutes tops." Emily shifted uncomfortably, stirring the last of her melted vanilla shake with her straw. "People say that place is haunted." Jessica rolled her eyes. "People say a lot of things. It's probably just asbestos and some homeless guy pissing in the hallways." Mark sighed, rubbing his temple. He knew better. He'd heard the stories, the disappearances, the strange noises at night, the way the doors never seemed to be in the same place twice. But he also knew Ryan wouldn't let it go. And if Ryan was going, Jessica would too. And if Jessica went, Emily wouldn't want to be the only one chickening out. And if Emily went, well, Mark wasn't about to be the one to stay behind. So, at 11:34 p.m., they parked at the edge of the crumbling school grounds, the place looming like a corpse under the streetlights. "Looks like something straight out of a horror movie," Mark muttered. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the school, but there was a gaping hole near the west side. The four of them slipped through, their sneakers crunching against dead leaves and cracked pavement. They crept toward a broken window on the first floor, its glass long since shattered. Ryan went first, hoisting himself up and sliding through, then reached back to help Jessica. Mark followed, pulling Emily up after him. The moment they landed inside, everything felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, as if the building itself was breathing. Dust hung in the moonlight, and every sound, every footstep, every creak, seemed unnaturally loud. "Okay," Jessica whispered. "We're in 5 minutes, then we're out. Or whoever runs out first has to buy our booze for the whole month, deal?" Ryan said, already grinning like a madman. The others groaned, but agreed in the end. They moved cautiously through the ruined hallways, stepping over broken desks and old textbooks that had been left to rot. Faint graffiti covered the walls, names, obscene doodles, warnings. Then, something whispered. It was distant, barely there, a breeze through the empty halls, maybe. The kind of thing that would have been easy to ignore if it hadn't been for the way it felt, like it had shape, direction, intent. Emily froze. "Did you hear that?" Ryan smirked. "The ghosts are saying hi." Mark swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder. The corridor behind them was empty, just shadows stretching long under the flickering emergency light. Another whisper, closer this time. "All right," Jessica said, her voice a little too forceful. "Let's just—" A floorboard creaked at the end of the hall. Mark turned, and someone was standing there, a figure, shadowy, motionless, too tall, too still. His breath caught in his throat. Then the figure moved, not walked, moved. Too fast, too sudden, rushing toward them in a blur of darkness. Mark's stomach dropped. His brain screamed, "Run!" He squeezed his eyes shut. And everything stopped. Dead silence. When he forced himself to look, the hallway was empty again. "Guys," Mark croaked, "we need to get out of here." But when they turned toward the exit, the door was gone. Mark's breath hitched. The door, the way they had come in, was gone. Not locked, not blocked, just missing. Ryan cursed under his breath, stepping forward and pressing his palms flat against the cold wall where the exit had been. "No way, no way, this isn't real. We came through here. The door was right here." Jessica's voice wavered. "Maybe we got turned around. Maybe we took a wrong turn." Emily was shaking her head violently. No, I don't think we did." Mark took a slow step back, his mind racing. It wasn't just the door. Something about the hallway itself felt different now, like it had stretched just a little too long. The walls seemed farther apart, the air heavier. The silence rang in his ears, oppressive, waiting. Ryan turned, his face twisting into a forced grin. "All right, guys. Haha, great prank. If one of you is screwing with us, seriously, cut the shit." Nobody laughed. "Okay," Jessica said, forcing an exhale. "We just need to find another way out. There's got to be an emergency exit, right?" No one wanted to argue with that. They turned and started walking. The hallway was endless, stretching forward into the dark, lined with classroom doors, some open, some barely hanging on their hinges. Mark's stomach clenched as something flickered in his peripheral vision. He turned his head, heart hammering. There was someone at the end of the hall, a shadowy figure still as a statue. No features, no eyes, just standing there, watching. Mark's throat went dry. "Guys, don't look behind us." Ryan, of course, did exactly that, and then he froze. His entire body went rigid, his breath catching in his throat like he'd just seen something he wasn't supposed to. Jessica and Emily spun around, their sharp intakes of breath the only confirmation Mark needed. The figure was closer now, too close. Mark's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. Ryan's voice came out hoarse. "We need to go, now." They turned on their heels and ran, boots slamming against the rotted tile, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The hallway blurred past them, doors, desks, darkened windows. Then Jessica let out a sharp cry. Mark twisted to see her fall, tripping over the jagged remains of a broken desk leg. Ryan and Emily skidded to a stop, rushing to help her up. Mark turned his head. The shadow was right there, less than 10 feet away, and it was moving, not walking, not running, just sliding forward as if gravity didn't quite apply to it. A black blur, a rush of cold air, then nothing. Mark clamped his eyes shut, his heart hammering, his breath barely contained in his chest. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Emily let out a strangled whisper. "It's gone." Mark forced himself to look. The hallway was empty. Jessica scrambled to her feet. "I don't like this. I don't like this at all." Ryan swallowed. "Let's get the hell out of here, now." They ran, again. But something had changed. The halls felt unfamiliar now, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. There was no logic to them, no structure. Just endless corridors stretching into the dark, turning back on themselves like a maze designed to confuse. And worst of all, the whispers were getting louder. The whispers crawled into their ears like insects. Faint at first, just a murmur, then louder, urgent, desperate. Mark kept moving, heart hammering in his chest as they rounded another corner. The school should have been simple. One long hallway lined with classrooms, a few branching halls leading to the cafeteria, gym, and faculty offices. But this wasn't right. They had run straight. They should have been near the entrance by now. Instead, the walls stretched into endless darkness. Jessica stopped suddenly, sucking in a sharp breath. "Wait," Ryan nearly collided into her. "What? Why'd you stop?" Jessica pointed. A classroom door stood open, just a crack. It hadn't been there a second ago. The four of them stared at it. A draft seeped through the gap, the air colder than the rest of the hallway. Emily whispered, "Maybe there's a window in there. Maybe we can get out." Mark didn't like it, not one bit. But what other choice did they have? With shaky steps, he reached out and pushed the door open. The classroom was frozen in time. Dust-covered desks sat in neat rows, like students had just walked out one day and never returned. Old textbooks lay open, their pages yellowed and brittle, and on the walls, paintings, at least 20 of them lined up in a perfect row. Portraits of students, their faces eerily detailed, frozen in mid-smile. The hairs on Mark's arms stood on end. Something about them felt wrong. Jessica stepped inside, scanning the room. "Okay, this is weird." Ryan snorted. "Yeah, no shit." Emily inched closer to the paintings, hugging her arms. "Why are they still here? Shouldn't they have been taken down when the school closed?" Ryan leaned in, inspecting one. "Damn, these look real." Too real. Mark's stomach churned. The paintings were so lifelike, down to the fine brushstrokes on their skin, the glint of light in their eyes. It was as if one of the eyes moved. Mark's breath caught. He saw it. A flicker, barely there, a shifting of the pupils, then another and another. A ripple ran through the paintings as every pair of eyes snapped to them. Emily gasped. "Did you see that? Did you?" The eyes kept moving, shifting, watching, following them. Jessica clamped a hand over her mouth. Ryan stepped back, knocking into a desk. The eyes weren't just following them now. The faces in the paintings were changing, mouths stretching, warping, grins widening too far, revealing too many teeth. Their once innocent smiles contorted into something grotesque. Mark's vision blurred. The whispers surged. A high-pitched wail filled the room, sharp as glass. Emily clutched her head. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Then Ryan's voice cut through the chaos. "Guys, look at this." Mark turned, pulse thrumming in his ears. Ryan was holding an old notebook, its cover cracked with age. He flipped to the last page. A half-finished test, its handwriting neat, until the last few lines. The words shifted into a frantic scrawl. "Don't look at them. They can only hurt you when you look at them. Don't look up. Don't look up." Silence fell. Emily's lip quivered. What does that mean?" Ryan exhaled. "I don't know, but I think we should—" A creaking sound above them. Mark's gut twisted with dread. He didn't want to look, but Ryan did. And when Ryan tilted his head back, he saw it. A grinning face pressed against the ceiling. Ryan made a horrible sound, a mix between a gasp and a strangled scream. Mark didn't want to look up. Didn't need to. He saw it reflected in Ryan's wide, horrified eyes. A face, grinning, its mouth too wide, lips stretched thin over jagged, irregular teeth. Its skin was gray, waxy, wrong. The eyes were black pits, but Mark swore they were watching, seeing. Ryan stumbled back, nearly tripping over a desk. His voice came out as a broken whisper. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Jessica yanked him back, squeezing her eyes shut. "Don't look at it." Mark swallowed, his hands clenched into fists. "Don't look up." The words on the notebook burned in his brain. Emily was shaking beside him. I don't understand. What happens if we—" The whispers surged, flooding the air, wrapping around them like fingers against their throats. Mark clenched his jaw. "We need to get out of this room, now." Ryan's breath was ragged. "How? If we move, we might—" A soft thump echoed from above, like something had dropped down. Emily made a choking sound, gripping Mark's sleeve. The air had turned ice cold. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. "Don't open them. Don't open them." Their footsteps were unsteady as they moved toward the door, hands stretched blindly in front of them. Something shifted in the room, a scraping sound. The chairs, no, something else, something moving. Mark's heart hammered so hard he swore it was shaking his ribs. Jessica fumbled for the door handle. Come on, come on." Her fingers wrapped around it. She yanked. The door wouldn't budge. Ryan let out a shaky breath. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Emily whimpered. "Try again." Jessica pulled. The door groaned. The paintings laughed. A guttural, wet sound like choked giggles forcing their way through locked jaws. Mark squeezed his eyes shut harder. "Don't look, don't look." Jessica yanked with everything she had. The door burst open. They stumbled through the threshold, slamming it shut behind them. For a long moment, none of them spoke, just stood there, breathing like they had run a marathon. Then Ryan shuddered. "We are so beyond screwed." Jessica braced herself against the wall, her fingers trembling. "We need to get out of here, now." Mark nodded, rubbing a hand over his face. The air in the hallway was just as thick, just as wrong, but at least they weren't in there. Then Emily let out a soft, barely audible whisper. "Guys, the paintings?" Mark turned, and his stomach dropped, because the paintings were still watching. The door they had just slammed shut had a tiny dust-covered window, and through it, a row of distorted faces peered out at them, grinning. Mark yanked his gaze away from the door, bile rising in his throat. They were still watching. The twisted faces, the grotesque smiles, pressed against the tiny window like animals in a cage. "Keep moving," Jessica whispered. Just don't look at them." Emily was shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I don't understand. What is this place? Why is it doing this?" Ryan ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting wildly. "I don't know, but I'm about 5 seconds from punching through a damn window and crawling out of here." Mark swallowed. "Let's find one first." They hurried down the hall, their footsteps echoing too loud in the stillness. The air was wrong here, too heavy, too full. The school was watching them. Jessica stopped abruptly at a half-open door. "Restroom," she breathed. "There's got to be a mirror in here." Mark hesitated. "You sure that's a good idea?" "No, I'm not sure about anything, but we need to breathe for a second." No one argued. They stepped inside. The restroom was large, rows of stalls stretching out into the dark. The stench of old mildew clung to the air. Cracks ran through the tiles, and the mirror above the sinks was huge, too big, stretching across the entire wall. Mark kept his gaze low, unwilling to look at his reflection. Something about it made his skin crawl. Jessica turned on the sink. Nothing, just a sputter of dust and air. Emily hugged herself, rocking slightly. I don't like this. It's too quiet. It's like something's waiting. Ryan scoffed. Yeah, well, join the club. Then Mark noticed it. The reflection of Ryan. It moved too slow, just a fraction of a second behind, like an old video lagging behind reality. Mark's stomach dropped. Ryan, he whispered. Don't move. Ryan frowned, confused. What? Why? Then his reflection smiled. Mark's breath left his lungs in a rush. Ryan wasn't smiling, but his reflection was too wide, too many teeth. Then it moved on its own. The reflected Ryan took a slow, deliberate step forward. The real Ryan didn't move. Emily screamed. Ryan stumbled backward, his breath ragged. What the? His reflection stayed put for just a second too long, then snapped back into place. Mark clamped a hand over his mouth. Jessica jerked her head away from the mirror, eyes squeezed shut. Don't look at it! Don't look! Ryan made a strangled noise, backing away. What the hell is happening? Emily turned. Her reflection didn't. It just stood there, head tilted, staring at her. Then slowly it lifted a hand and tapped against the glass. Once, twice. Ryan grabbed her arm. We're leaving, now. They turned and bolted. Behind them, the mirror cracked. The tapping turned into pounding. Something wanted out. They didn't stop running until the pounding behind them faded into silence. Mark's legs burned, but he didn't dare slow down. The others were gasping, their breaths ragged. The school was twisting around them. Doors they had passed earlier were gone, hallways stretching longer than they should. Then the whispers stopped. All at once, the silence was worse. It pressed in on them, thick and suffocating. Ryan muttered, I hate this so much. Jessica grabbed his wrist, squeezing hard. We keep moving, A metallic clatter echoed down the hallway. Mark turned sharply. The lockers. They lined both sides of the hall, rusted and covered in peeling paint. But now they were shaking, a slow, rhythmic rattling like something was inside, slamming against the metal doors. One after another, they trembled. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. Run! They bolted. The sound followed them, lockers slamming, rattling, shrieking. And then the doors burst open. Mark caught a glimpse of something crawling out. Long, thin limbs folding over themselves, joints bending the wrong way. Too many fingers. The whispering surged back all at once, screaming in his skull. Emily let out a strangled sob. Don't look. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't want to see them. He could hear them, skittering, dragging across the tile, the soft scrape of 2 long nails on metal. Jessica tripped. Ryan caught her, yanking her forward as something snatched at her ankle. She kicked wildly, screaming, and Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her free. They ran, blindly, desperately. Something whispered right beside his ear. Too close, too real, but he didn't look. They slammed into a door at the end of the hallway, and Mark shoved it open, stumbling inside. A classroom. They threw themselves against the door, slamming it shut. The whispers stopped again. The silence was deafening. Mark's whole body shook. He tried to steady his breathing, but his pulse refused to slow. Then behind them, the old chalkboard, covered in dust, moved. A single word scrawled across it in jagged white streaks. Eyes shut equals safety. Mark exhaled, chest tight. Jessica whispered, It can't hurt us unless we see it. Ryan let out a weak laugh. Well, that's just great. Then slowly, the chalk began moving again. It spelled their names, one by one. Mark watched, frozen, as the chalk scratched their names onto the board. Ryan, Jessica, Emily, Mark. One by one, the letters appeared, written by an invisible hand. Emily clutched Mark's sleeve, her voice barely above a whisper. It knows us. Ryan's fists clenched at his sides. No kidding. Then, beneath their names, the chalk kept writing, You are not alone. Jessica backed up against a desk, shaking her head. Nope, we need to leave, now. Ryan spun toward the door. And go where? Right back into whatever the hell those things are? Mark wiped sweat from his brow. If we keep our eyes shut, they can't touch us. We just need to... The chalk scraped faster. New words appeared, jagged and frantic. One of you looked. Silence fell. A slow, creeping dread filled Mark's stomach. He turned to his friends. Jessica shook her head violently. Not me, I swear, Emily whispered. I didn't. Ryan took a step back, eyes darting between them. Oh, come on, man, what is this, a horror movie? It's trying to mess with us. Mark wanted to believe that, but something about the words felt true. Then, the chalk dropped to the floor. A rush of cold air slammed into the room, and the whispering came back. Not distant anymore, not creeping from the hall. Inside, with them. The temperature plummeted, ice forming along the edges of the windows. The shadows in the corners stretched, twisting, reaching. Then, a voice, not a whisper, not a scream, a soft, breathy mockery. Why did you look? Emily whimpered. Jessica clapped a hand over her mouth. Mark didn't move. The air was thick, pressing against his skin. He swore he felt something watching from behind him. Then, slow as death, a new name began to appear on the chalkboard, letter by letter. Mark. His blood turned to ice. Ryan grabbed his wrist. Go now. They ran. Mark didn't look back, not at the chalkboard, not at the twisting shadows stretching toward them, not at the thing that whispered his name. They barreled into the next hallway, barely stopping themselves from colliding into the walls. Ahead, double doors. Jessica gasped, pointing. The gym. There's got to be an exit there. Mark didn't hesitate. They threw open the doors and rushed inside, and froze. Because the gymnasium was full, the bleachers were packed with shadowy figures. All of them staring, all of them waiting, and above them, the scoreboard lit up, counting down from 10. 10. The numbers glowed an eerie red on the scoreboard above the gym floor. Mark's breath hitched. It was counting down. Jessica clutched his arm. What happens when it hits 0? Ryan swallowed hard. I don't want to find out. 9. The bleachers were full of them. Not people, not ghosts. Shadowy figures, featureless except for their eyes, glowing, hollow, watching. Rows and rows of them, lining the seats like silent spectators. Emily whimpered, What do we do? 8. Mark's mind raced. The creatures hadn't attacked, not yet, because they were watching. This was a game, a sick, twisted game. Jessica tugged at him, voice urgent. We need to go, now. 7. Ryan turned, scanning the gym. Where's the exit? Mark's stomach dropped. There wasn't one. No doors, no windows, no way out. Just them, watching, waiting. 6. The whispers crept back, curling around them like smoke. But these weren't just whispers. They were voices. Familiar voices. Mark's breath stuttered as he heard his mother's voice. Mark, she called, soft, gentle, loving. It's okay, just look at me. Emily let out a sob. No, 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 she was shaking, her hands pressed to her ears. Ryan's face had gone pale. It's my dad, his voice cracked. I swear to God, it's my dad. Jessica's nails dug into Mark's wrist. Her lips were trembling. It's my sister. She's been gone for years. 5. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. They're lying. They were trying to trick them. 4. The figures in the bleachers leaned forward, eager, anticipating. 3. The gym darkened. The shadows moved. Mark felt something shift around them. A presence. Something huge. Something waiting. 2. Then Mark understood. It wasn't just a game. It was a test. They had to make it to the other side. But they had to do it blind. Close your eyes, Mark whispered. Jessica turned to him, eyes wide with fear. What? Close them, now. Don't open them, no matter what you hear. 1. Ryan exhaled. Oh, screw this. He grabbed his hoodie, yanked it over his head, blindfolding himself. Jessica did the same. Mark clenched his fists. Then just as the scoreboard hit 0, the gym erupted in screams. The figures rushed them. Mark squeezed his eyes shut and walked forward. Mark walked blindly, his breath tight in his chest. Don't open your eyes. The air around them shifted, heavy and thrumming with movement. The creatures were close, their presence like a cold wind against his skin. Jessica's hand gripped his wrist tightly. Emily clung to the back of his jacket. Ryan's heavy breathing was just behind him. They were still together. That was all that mattered. The whispers grew desperate. Mark, his mother's voice right beside his ear. Sweetheart, open your eyes. I'm right here. His jaw clenched. No, not real. A warm hand brushed against his arm. A voice. Jessica's voice. Mark, it's okay. You can look. We're safe now. He almost fell for it. Almost, but Jessica was still holding his wrist. They could imitate voices. They couldn't mimic touch. Emily let out a choked cry. "It's my dad! I can hear him!" Ryan cursed under his breath. "Just keep moving, Em. Ignore it." Their feet hit the gym floor, step by step, inch by inch. Something brushed against Mark's leg. Long fingers, too many fingers. He didn't stop. Emily let out a sharp breath. "There's a door. I feel a handle." Mark heard Ryan stumble, let out a startled gasp. Mark's heart nearly stopped. "Ryan?" Silence, a long, cold silence, then a hoarse whisper. "I'm here, Ryan." Mark's pulse slammed against his ribs. "You okay?" "Yeah, let's go." Emily yanked the door open. Cold night air rushed in. They ran. Through the threshold into the darkened street. The whispers cut off. The air stilled. And suddenly the school was just a school again. Silent, motionless, the windows empty. Jessica gasped, falling to her knees on the pavement. Emily sobbed, pressing her hands to her face. Ryan braced himself against the curb, shaking. Mark turned, his breath visible in the cold air. It was over. Then Ryan whispered, "Don't." Mark frowned. "What?" Ryan's voice trembled. "Don't look back." Mark swallowed, his whole body tensing. Jessica whispered, "Why?" Ryan's voice barely held together. "Because they're still watching." Mark couldn't help himself. He turned and froze. The school was still. The night was quiet. But in the windows, dozens of grinning faces, watching, waiting. Then in the reflection of the car window beside them, a fifth shadow stood among them. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The reflection in the car window, 5 shadows instead of 4. A fifth figure, standing just behind them, close enough to touch. His blood ran cold. Ryan saw it too. His face paled, lips parting slightly. Jessica's breath hitched. Emily took an unsteady step back. None of them turned around. None of them looked. Mark's pulse hammered. The school loomed behind them, its windows filled with watching faces, silent, waiting. The fifth shadow didn't move. Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "We're not alone." Mark swallowed. "I know." The reflection in the window tilted its head, a slow, unnatural movement, like it was studying them. Jessica squeezed her eyes shut. "What do we do?" Emily was shaking. I don't know. Then the reflection smiled. Not Ryan, not Jessica, not Emily, the thing. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, and then it lifted a hand and waved. Emily screamed. Ryan grabbed her, yanking her away from the car. "Get in, now." Mark tore open the driver's door, hand shaking as he jammed the keys into the ignition. The car roared to life. Jessica threw herself into the passenger seat. Emily and Ryan tumbled into the back. Mark's foot slammed on the gas. The car lurched forward, tires screeched against pavement. He didn't look at the school, didn't look at the windows filled with grinning faces, didn't look at the thing standing behind them. He drove, fast. Streetlights blurred past. The school faded into the darkness behind them. The whispers were gone. Silence filled the car, thick and suffocating. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. They didn't stop until they were miles away, pulling into an empty gas station parking lot. Only then did Mark let out a shuddering breath. His hands shook violently against the steering wheel. Jessica was hunched forward, face in her hands. Emily pressed her forehead against the window, staring blankly into the night. Ryan just sat there, staring straight ahead. Mark exhaled, voice hoarse. Did we make it?" No one answered. Then, a quiet tap. Mark stiffened. The others froze. Slowly, almost against his will, Mark turned his head. The rearview mirror reflected the 4 of them, and behind them, a fifth shadow, still smiling. Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.